everyone, it's me, the Lucky TV Viewer, and this might be the first time I get talk about Fire Emblem Cyber Review, so yay! And as you can see by the four weapons up on screen, we're going to be talking about the four Valentian Regalias, as something I've actually don't really see talked about much. Echoes quite possibly gives us a full history about these four weapons. Now note, Vengeance is actually not brought up. It only appears in Awakening. However, considering Giants don't really have access, I think we all understand why that is. So I'm going to just include Vengeance for the sake of, it looks like it functions as the other Regalias. I feel like it should be a part of them. It's just that Gaiden didn't have any axes, so therefore it couldn't be added into the game. So yeah, like I said, prior to Echoes, all we really know was that they were rare drops from enemies doing Gaiden, and they just reappeared in Awakening. With the only one really appeared was Soul, really by Wallheart. And that was basically it. We didn't know where these weapons came from or what they were doing. They were just, weapons that you can find. However, the good people of intelligent systems decided that it was time to give these four weapons a backstory. And what does that backstory includes? Well, turns out the quote-unquote Valentian Regalias aren't actually from Regalia. Not Regalia, Valentia. I was thinking Regalia. Yeah, that's what I think it was. But yeah, no, they're not from Valentia. Turns out, they're from Thebes! So, remember the story of Grima? How Grima was created, and the Senate sent messengers to try to figure out what's going on with Phineas, and then they died. So then, they decided to send soldiers down to retrieve Phineas and bring him back for questioning. It's more likely amongst this group of soldiers, possibly the four strongest, that they wielded these four weapons. Now, it basically depends on whether or not you want to believe that they are like this, or they were reforged, or whatever. But basically, I'm gonna go with the assumption that they were once the ones that you basically get in Valentius in Echo. So, Ashura was the sword, Soul was a lance, and Luna was a bow, and Vengeance was still an axe. Vengeance doesn't really change throughout, so I'm just going to say it right now. Vengeance doesn't really change, since, we don't really have the actual weapon to speak of. Which kind of sucks. Because that would have been, cool to have all four. But yeah, likely willing the four strongest amongst this group of soldiers that were sent down into the labyrinth, wielding these weapons, what likely went off and fought Grima. Why? Because from what I can find, one of the best ways to farm outside of the outside DLC for Astra, Sol, and Luna is the actual Grima fight. Apparently, there's certain enemies that drop them, and they spawn during that fight. So I'm willing to suggest that it's possible that these four soldiers went off to try and fight Grima, having likely heard about the mage's account of how something horrendous was being kept down there, and they were likely trying to kill it before it becomes a threat. Heck, it might be this incident that ultimately prompted Phineas to believe that Grima was too strong, and that he needed to kill him. Who knows? But regardless, one thing led to another, and all the soldiers died, and the weapons were left down in the labyrinth, being sealed off and basically left to rot. And that's how it was for 3,000 years. These weapons would inevitably just become rusted little tools, little weapons left behind by a long-forgotten civilization. And then Almond Stelicus came to Arcanea. Hooray! And caused a lot of stuff to happen. Of course, yeah, basically, from here we get to basically Shadows of Valentia, where Almond Celica comes to Thebes. They go to the labyrinth, they fought Grima, and they'll more than likely retrieve these four weapons. And I want to bring this up because a lot of people are still trying to say, well, maybe it's not canon they went down there. Maybe it's just something, it's basically just the creators trying to tell us what happened without, it being canon. Look, I bring this up now because of this new connection. I think it's for certain that they were the ones to go down there. Again, Alm's the only one with another Falchion, which can basically at least still do something against Rima. Also, there's a fire dragon down there, so maybe, and hear me out here, the only people who could possibly do anything against it is the guy with the Falchion. Again, the only reason why they didn't warn anyone was likely because they didn't know what Grima was truly capable of. They thought they just, they killed him and then he just vanished. It's like, okay, well, I guess we don't have to deal with that anymore. Little did they actually realize is that either A, they simply wounded Grima and he basically had to retreat, or B, he basically just warped out. So, I know, who's to say? But likely, this is where Alma-Celica, aka Valentia itself, gets these 4 weapons, and they all likely and either one or two things happen. Either A, they were forged into the way they were, or B, we forged into the new weapons we see them in Awakening. Aka, Astra becomes a bow, Soul becomes a sword, Luna becomes a lance, and Vengeance stays as an axe. As from there, well, that's kinda it. From here, we kinda really don't know what happened. As, again, all we know from the actual story is Soul is wielded by Wallheart, and we don't know what happened to the other 4 weapons, since they're all Street Pass. So, I mean, it's possible that they ended up, you know, being lost to time. Maybe they were just kept in the whatever weapon vaults, treasure vaults that treasure vaults that Valm had. Hard to say. And yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, I do want to bring up the possibility that from these weapons, the skills Astra, let me rephrase that. If skills Astra, Soul, Luna, and Vengeance are found, sure, the 3 Astra, Luna, and Soul were all skills that were learned in the genealogy games. But from there, aside from that game, Gaiden, Shadow Dragons, and Mystery of the Emblem don't have these skills. So it is possible that from these magical weapons, basically we acquired these 4 skills. And I'm counting Vengeance in this bunch because I feel like I just should. Since, Astra, Luna, and Soul were all things in the previous games, and I feel like if they ever redid genealogies, that we would actually see the skill of Vengeance in the game as well. So it is possible that these skills originate were possible. Let me rephrase this. They were possible weapons skills that existed, but they only existed to the knowledge of the people of Judrol. I didn't tell you parents. Whatever. The people of freaking the genealogy games, since we don't really see these skills practiced outside of that game. And it's possible that with these 4 weapons, they eventually learn, the 4 skills, with lethality probably being an offshoot of Luna, basically a more lethal, one-shot, focus for a critical kind of thing. At least that's how I want to interpret it as. But yeah, that's kind of it. And again, you wouldn't think we would get a kind of backstory for these 4 weapons, yet we do. One game basically tells us, yo, remember these quote-unquote Valentia weapons? Well, guess what? They're not from Valentia. They're from Thebes. So yeah, take that as you will. Basically, Thebes had had access to these kinds of weapons, and the only reason that Balm even had Soul was because Alm and Celica basically went grave robbing. Yeah, kind of puts things into perspective. Regardless, that's more or less it for this episode. Again, I just want to talk about these four weapons since not a lot of people actually bring up how you find these weapons and how this kind of is a big thing since it basically like this is kind of the missing puzzle piece to whether or not the post game to Echoes is true or not. Because I mean, we know Soul is we know that Soul is in Valentia's hands by the time Awakening happens, and the only noted time where Balm comes to Arcanea, more specifically, they go to Thebes, where these weapons are found, is of course with Alm and Celica's group. Because again, why would a group of Valentians or Valmies, or however you want to call them, why would they suddenly leave their home country, come to Arcanea, go to this abandoned route, and go through all this, somehow beat a Fire Drake, and survive the fight with Grima in order to attain these weapons? My point is, I think these weapons more or less, these weapons being in Echoes the way they're implemented, kind of confirms that yes, all this is canon. This is how these weapons end up in Balm's hand. This is how Soul ends up at Volhard in Awakening. This is canon. Almond Celica's basically inadvertently unleashed Grima upon the world. And yeah, and it's just something I want to bring up since not a lot of people talk about it or use these four weapons as a argument to the whole it's post game isn't canon thing. So let this be the final argument. Let this be the final argument of that whole debacle because regardless of whether or not it's canon, I like to believe it's canon because let's be honest here, who else would have been able to do all that? Regardless of whether or not you want to believe it's or not, in Celica we went to Thebes and unleashed Grima, or some other group, Grima gets unleashed and we had to deal with that in Awakening. I just like to believe that the way they handle the full Valentian Regalias are kind of cements the whole, this is how that happened. So, yeah, that's basically it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.